Did you know Clara Bow and Howard Hughes were considered the biggest dumb in old Hollywood history? But they were not the only two. Old Hollywood was full of celebrities who did things that made many believe they were either mad or dumb. The golden era of cinema was absolutely packed with stars whose off-screen lives were stranger than any script they ever performed. From actors who kept vultures as pets, to actresses who held seances in their dressing rooms, from leading men who experimented with mind-altering drugs under medical supervision, to icons who built shrines for themselves in their own homes, Hollywood's golden age was anything but normal. Clara Bow. Let's start with the original It Girl, Clara Bow. She defined the flapper era, and was one of the biggest stars of the 1920s and early 1930s. But behind that infectious smile was a woman with some truly unusual habits. Clara kept an open-door policy at her house that would make modern celebrities faint. She'd invite complete strangers in for parties that could last for days. But here's where it gets really interesting. She was absolutely obsessed with the color red. We're not talking about a favorite color preference here. Her hair was red. She painted her toenails red. She had red furniture, red curtains, red everything. Legend has it, she even dyed her two Chow Chow dogs bright red to match her aesthetic. But the eccentricity didn't stop there. Clara had a notorious gambling problem and would regularly host all-night poker games with her Hollywood friends, often losing thousands of dollars in a single sitting. She also had a habit of driving around Los Angeles at dangerous speeds in her red convertible, sometimes with her red-dyed dogs in the passenger seat, causing traffic chaos wherever she went. The tabloids of the era had a field day with her wild lifestyle, and while some of the stories were exaggerated, Clara herself admitted that she lived life at full throttle. Consequences be damned. Her eccentricities, combined with the studio system's pressure and her struggles with mental health, eventually led to her early retirement from Hollywood at just 28 years old. She retreated from public life, but her legacy as one of Hollywood's most colorful, literally and figuratively, personalities remains intact. John Barrymore. Now let's talk about John Barrymore, the legendary profile and grandfather of the Barrymore acting dynasty. This man was known as the Great Profile because of his stunning good looks, but his personal life was anything but picture-perfect conventional. Barrymore had a fascination with the macabre that went beyond his famous roles in horror films. He collected skulls, real human skulls. He'd display them around his house and reportedly would recite Shakespeare to them, treating them like an audience of the deceased. But wait, it gets weirder. Barrymore kept a pet vulture named Maloney. Yes, a vulture. He'd walk around his estate with this bird perched on his shoulder like some sort of gothic pirate, and he claimed the bird was excellent company. He also had a pet monkey that he reportedly taught to mix martinis, though how effective the monkey was at bartending remains a matter of Hollywood legend. His Bella Vista estate was like a bizarre menagerie crossed with a Gothic castle. Barrymore's eccentricity extended to his professional life, too. He was known for playing elaborate practical jokes on his co-stars, sometimes in the middle of serious dramatic scenes. He'd hide props, change his lines to throw off other actors, or make faces behind the camera to make his fellow performers break character. Directors both loved and feared working with him because while he was undeniably talented, you never quite knew what version of John Barrymore would show up on set. His love life was equally chaotic. He was married 4 times and had numerous affairs, often conducting multiple relationships simultaneously. He once said, "The trouble with life is that there are so many beautiful women and so little time." In his later years, his eccentricities were compounded by his struggle with alcoholism, But even then, he maintained his dark sense of humor and his collection of unusual pets and artifacts. When he died in 1942, Hollywood lost not just a great actor, but one of its most genuinely strange characters. And that's saying something in a town built on pretending to be someone else. Mae West. Mae West was a woman who lived life entirely on her own terms in an era when women were expected to be demure and submissive. Her eccentricity started with her persona itself. The sultry, sexually confident character she created was revolutionary for the 1930s and 1940s. But off-screen, Mae was just as unusual as her on-screen personality suggested, if not more so. First, let's talk about her spiritual beliefs. Mae West was deeply invested in the occult and mysticism. She regularly held seances, consulted psychics, and practiced what she called spiritual healing. She believed in reincarnation and claimed she had been an Egyptian queen in a past life. Her home was filled with crystals, mystical artifacts, and books on spiritualism. She wasn't just dabbling. She took this stuff seriously and made major life and career decisions based on psychic advice. She even wrote about her spiritual beliefs, incorporating them into her public persona, in a time when such things were considered extremely fringe. Then there was her entourage. Mae West surrounded herself with muscular bodybuilders and weightlifters, keeping them on her payroll ostensibly as security and assistants. She'd have them dress in tight-fitting clothes and would parade them around Hollywood like living accessories. While this might not seem too unusual by today's standards, in the 1930s and 1940s, it was quite the spectacle. She appreciated the male form the way men of that era openly appreciated women, completely flipping the script on gender dynamics. Mae also had peculiar health and beauty routines. She believed in daily enemas for health and beauty. Yes, you read that right, and would often evangelize about their benefits to anyone who would listen. She also had a strict regimen that included eating very particular foods at very particular times, all based on her spiritual and health beliefs. She would only eat organic food decades before it became trendy, and she avoided processed foods like they were poison. Perhaps most eccentric was her relationship with time itself. As she aged, Mae West became increasingly reclusive, but also increasingly fixated on maintaining her image of eternal youth and sexuality. She'd only allow herself to be photographed in carefully controlled lighting, and she continued to play romantic leads well into her 70s, opposite much younger men. She lived in a white and gold apartment in Los Angeles that was basically a shrine to herself, filled with mirrors, portraits, and memorabilia from her career. Mae West didn't just live eccentrically. She turned her eccentricity into a brand, and she maintained that brand until her death at age 87. Cary Grant. Cary Grant was the epitome of debonair sophistication on screen, the ultimate charming leading man who made effortless elegance look, well, effortless. But behind closed doors, this suave gentleman was exploring the outer reaches of his consciousness in ways that would have shocked his fans and studio executives had they known the full extent of his experiments. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Cary Grant underwent LSD therapy. Now, before you think this was just recreational drug use, understand that at the time, LSD was legal and was being used by psychiatrists as a therapeutic tool. Grant worked with Dr. Mortimer Hartman in Los Angeles and reportedly underwent more than 100 acid trips over several years as part of his therapy. He wasn't doing this to party. He was trying to work through deep-seated psychological issues, childhood trauma, and what he described as his inability to be truly intimate in relationships. What's fascinating is that Grant was incredibly open about this, at least within certain circles. He told friends and journalists that LSD had changed his life, that it had helped him shed his insecurities and find peace with himself. He described experiencing ego death, reliving childhood memories, and gaining insights into his behavior patterns. This was heavy psychological work, and Grant took it very seriously. He credited these sessions with saving his life and his sanity, saying they helped him move past the trauma of his mother's institutionalization when he was a child and his subsequent abandonment issues. But Grant's eccentricities went beyond his therapeutic drug use. He was also famous for his extreme frugality, despite being one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood. He'd wear the same clothes until they literally fell apart. He'd reuse tea bags multiple times, and he was known to save and reuse pieces of string. His wives and friends found this quirk both amusing and frustrating. Here was a man worth millions who acted like every penny counted. He also had a peculiar ritual regarding his appearance. Grant would spend hours perfecting his tan using sun lamps and was meticulous about his grooming to an almost obsessive degree. Yet he'd turn around and wear worn-out shoes and frayed cuffs. The contradiction between his on-screen image of effortless perfection and his off-screen penny-pinching and consciousness exploration made him a fascinating study in contrasts. Later in life, Grant became increasingly reclusive, stepping away from acting at the height of his career in the mid-1960s. He'd occasionally emerge for special events, always looking impeccable, but he largely retreated from the spotlight. Some speculated that his LSD experiences had fundamentally changed how he viewed fame and Hollywood, making the whole circus seem less important. Whether that's true or not, Cary Grant remains one of the most interesting examples of how the polished public persona can be dramatically different from the private person exploring the depths of human consciousness in a psychiatrist's office. Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn was eccentric from day one, and she never apologized for it. In an era when women were expected to wear dresses, be soft-spoken, and defer to men, Hepburn showed up to Hollywood wearing pants, speaking her mind, and taking exactly zero nonsense from studio executives. But her eccentricity went far deeper than just being a strong-willed woman in a man's world. Let's start with her living situation. For much of her life, Hepburn lived in the same modest house in Los Angeles. Modest by Hollywood standards anyway, but she also maintained her family home in Connecticut and would regularly disappear from Hollywood for months at a time. She'd retreat to the East Coast, completely disconnecting from the film industry, swimming in Long Island Sound even in cold weather, taking long, solitary walks, and generally living like a reclusive New England spinster rather than a Hollywood icon. She despised the Hollywood social scene and rarely attended parties or premieres, preferring her own company or that of a small circle of trusted friends. Her fashion choices were revolutionary and bizarre for the time. Hepburn wore men's pants in an era when women could literally be arrested for wearing trousers in public. The studio RKO once tried to force her into dresses by stealing her pants from her dressing room, hoping she'd have to wear a dress. Hepburn's response? She walked around the studio lot in her underwear until they returned her pants. That's a power move if there ever was one. She also went without makeup whenever possible, which was practically scandalous for a Hollywood actress, and she cut her hair short and wore it in practical styles rather than the glamorous waves that were fashionable. Hepburn had peculiar eating habits and health obsessions. She believed in taking cold showers every single day, even in winter, claiming they were invigorating and healthy. She'd also go for swims in cold water whenever possible. Her diet was incredibly strict and based on what she believed were health principles: lots of vegetables, very little meat, and absolutely no indulgence in sweets or rich foods. She maintained this regimen for decades and credited it with her longevity and energy. But perhaps her most eccentric trait was her absolute refusal to play the Hollywood game. She didn't give autographs, she rarely gave interviews, and when she did interact with the press, she was notoriously difficult and would often just walk away mid-interview if she didn't like the questions. She once told a reporter, "I have no romantic feelings about age. Either you are interesting at any age, or you are not. There is nothing particularly interesting about being old, or being young, for that matter." She simply didn't care what anyone thought of her, which was incredibly rare in an industry built on public opinion and image management. Her long relationship with Spencer Tracy was also conducted largely in secret and on her own terms, with Hepburn reportedly managing much of Tracy's life and career while maintaining her own independence. She never married Tracy, he was married to someone else, and she seemed perfectly content with this arrangement, again defying conventional expectations. Katharine Hepburn didn't just march to the beat of her own drum, she brought her own drum, played it loudly, and didn't care if anyone else liked the rhythm. Marlon Brando. If you want to talk about Hollywood eccentricity, you eventually have to talk about Marlon Brando. This man redefined acting with his method approach and raw emotional honesty, but his off-screen life was a masterclass in not giving a damn about convention. Brando's eccentricities started early and only intensified as he became more famous and more disillusioned with Hollywood. First, let's discuss his living situation. Brando purchased a private island in Tahiti called Tetiaroa after filming Mutiny on the Bounty in 1962. This wasn't just a vacation home, this was his escape from Hollywood, civilization, and everything he found fake and constraining about Western society. He'd disappear to this island for months, living simply, fishing, swimming, and essentially going native. He became obsessed with Polynesian culture and environmental conservation, pouring money and energy into preserving the island and supporting local communities. This wasn't a celebrity's exotic plaything. Brando truly connected with the place and its people in a deep way that most Hollywood stars would never understand. Back in Los Angeles, Brando's home life was equally unconventional. He kept unusual pets throughout his life, including raccoons, chickens, and at one point, a 9-foot-long python. He'd let the animals roam freely through his house, much to the horror of visitors. He also had a fascination with electronics and would fill his home with the latest recording equipment, cameras, and technical gadgets. He'd record conversations, experiment with film equipment, and basically turn his house into a personal laboratory for whatever interested him at the moment. Brando's approach to his career was perhaps his most eccentric quality. Despite being one of the greatest actors of all time, he grew to despise acting and Hollywood. He'd show up to sets unprepared, refuse to memorize lines, and have dialogue written on cue cards, on other actors' foreheads, or even on props. During The Godfather, he stuffed his cheeks with cotton to create the Don's distinctive look, and during Apocalypse Now, he showed up significantly overweight and completely unprepared, forcing director Francis Ford Coppola to essentially build the film around his condition and improvisation. Yet somehow his performances were still brilliant, which must have been infuriating for everyone else involved. His relationship with fame and money was contradictory and strange. Brando would demand huge salaries. He was one of the first actors to get a percentage of box office profits, but then he'd blow the money on his island, on various causes, or on supporting his enormous extended family and numerous children from multiple relationships. He'd take roles in terrible movies just for the paycheck, openly admitting he was only there for the money. Yet he'd also turn down prestigious projects that didn't interest him or align with his political beliefs. Speaking of politics, Brando was deeply involved in civil rights and Native American rights activism. He famously sent Sachin Littlefeather to refuse his Oscar for The Godfather, in protest of Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans, a move that was considered absolutely shocking at the time and remained controversial for decades. He'd use his fame as a platform for causes he believed in, even when it damaged his career or reputation. In his later years, Brando became increasingly reclusive and heavy, living in Los Angeles but rarely leaving his home. He'd order massive amounts of food delivered, eat in isolation, and largely withdraw from public life except for occasional film roles. Yet even then, he remained fascinating, giving weird interviews, saying provocative things, and refusing to be the grateful Hollywood legend people expected. Marlon Brando lived and died on his own terms, and if those terms seemed bizarre to everyone else, well, that was everyone else's problem, not his. Howard Hughes. And finally, we arrive back at the man we started with, Howard Hughes. If there's a poster child for Golden Age Hollywood eccentricity, it's Hughes. This man was a billionaire, an aviator, an engineer, a film producer, and a bona fide genius. And also, by the end of his life, one of the most bizarre hermits the world has ever seen. But let's start at the beginning, because Hughes's eccentricity didn't just appear overnight, it evolved over decades. In his younger years, Hughes was known as a dashing playboy who dated Hollywood's most beautiful actresses, including Katharine Hepburn, Ava Gardner, and Ginger Rogers. He produced and directed films, including the scandalous The Outlaw, starring Jane Russell, which pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable in Hollywood at the time. He set world aviation records and survived multiple plane crashes that left him in chronic pain and addicted to painkillers. But even in these relatively normal years, there were signs of the obsessive personality that would later consume him. Hughes was obsessed with perfection in his films and his aircraft designs. He'd spend insane amounts of money and time pursuing his vision. Damn the consequences. When making Hell's Angels, he insisted on authentic aerial combat footage, which resulted in the deaths of multiple stunt pilots. He'd reshoot scenes dozens of times, costing millions, because something wasn't quite right. This perfectionism, combined with an increasingly obsessive personality, would eventually morph into something much darker. The germ phobia started gradually, but eventually took over his life. Hughes began insisting that people use multiple tissues to handle objects before giving them to him. He created elaborate protocols for his staff, memos that ran dozens of pages describing exactly how to open a can of fruit, how to deliver documents, how to approach him. Everything had to be sanitized, wrapped, and handled with extreme care. He was terrified of contamination, of disease, of anything foreign entering his body or his space. As the years went on, Hughes became increasingly reclusive. He'd rent out entire floors of hotels, board up windows, and live in darkness. He'd watch movies obsessively, the same films over and over, dozens of times. He reportedly watched Ice Station Zebra 150 times. He'd sit naked in a chair in a sealed room, conducting his business empire through written notes passed under the door. His hair and beard grew long and unkempt. His fingernails and toenails grew to grotesque lengths because he was afraid of contamination from cutting them. He became skeletal, barely eating, addicted to codeine and Valium, existing in a twilight world of pain, paranoia, and isolation. But here's the really interesting part. Even in this deteriorated state, Hughes was still running a massive business empire. He was making decisions about airlines, casinos in Las Vegas, film studios, and more. His mind was still sharp in many ways, even as his body and mental health crumbled. He moved from hotel to hotel, city to city, always in darkness, always surrounded by his Mormon mafia. A group of Mormon aides he trusted because he believed they wouldn't drink or do drugs and would therefore be more reliable. Hughes also developed bizarre obsessions during this period. He became fixated on buying up property in Las Vegas, Vegas, and is credited with helping transform it from a mob-controlled gambling town into a corporate entertainment destination. He'd make multi-million-dollar decisions from his darkened hotel room, never actually visiting the properties he was purchasing. He became obsessed with nuclear testing in Nevada and wrote numerous memos about it, convinced the radiation would somehow affect him even hundreds of miles away. The tragic irony of Howard Hughes is that he had everything: money, fame, success, genius, and yet he ended up a prisoner of his own mind, living in self-imposed exile, terrified of the world and everyone in it. When he died in 1976 on an airplane being evacuated from Mexico to Texas, he weighed only 90 pounds, had needle marks all over his body from drug injections, and was so unrecognizable that the FBI had to use fingerprints to confirm his identity. The eccentric billionaire playboy had become a living ghost, a cautionary tale about how genius and madness often walk hand in hand. So there you have it, some of the most eccentric, unusual, and downright weird personalities from Hollywood's golden age. What's fascinating is that these weren't just quirky people playing characters. Their eccentricities were fundamental to who they were, and in many cases, those strange qualities contributed to their genius. Clara Bow's wild energy translated to the screen. John Barrymore's dark fascinations made his performances more intense. Mae West's spiritual confidence gave her that magnetic presence. Cary Grant's deep psychological exploration may have made him a more empathetic actor. Katharine Hepburn's refusal to conform made her characters stronger. Marlon Brando's disdain for convention revolutionized acting. And Howard Hughes, for all his tragic decline, changed multiple industries forever. The golden age of Hollywood gave us incredible films and unforgettable performances, but it also gave us these wonderfully weird human beings who refused to fit into neat boxes. They were geniuses and eccentrics, artists and oddballs, legends and lunatics, sometimes all at the same time. In our modern age of carefully managed celebrity images and social media personas, there's something refreshing about remembering a time when stars could be genuinely, authentically strange. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Hollywood's eccentric past, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more fascinating stories from the golden age of cinema. Drop a comment below telling us which eccentric celebrity surprised you the most, or if there are other old Hollywood stars you'd like us to cover. Until next time, remember, normal is overrated, and the most interesting people rarely color inside the lines.